Nick, I want to zoom in on the Russia situation on the international stage and the role that the United States has. Economic sanctions as a foreign policy tool, there's a huge debate as to whether they've actually worked. And for Russia, there's a serious argument that, if anything, they've energized support domestically for President Putin. And the suggestion that they've interfered in elections elsewhere, and let's not have that debate right now, but the suggestion that they have done says to me that these economic sanctions haven't worked. So is a reset not the right approach, the prudent response of an incoming administration?
No, it's exactly the wrong response. The fact is that when Putin went into Crimea and annexed it, and then into the Donbass and divided it, there had to be a response. It wasn't going to be military force. We weren't going to risk a military conflict with Russia. We had no obligation to Ukraine. The cost to Putin had to be sanctions. And combined with the lower oil prices, there has been an impact on the Russian economy. Look how furiously Putin is working to try to lift those sanctions. Angela Merkel, who's the strongest leader in the West right now, wants to make sure the sanctions are kept on Russia so that Putin doesn't want to get away with, in effect, grand larceny for stealing Crimea. So I would keep the sanctions. All of Europe wants to keep the sanctions, and they're worried that Donald Trump is going to lift the sanctions and get very little in return.
Nick, is that true that all of Europe wants to keep the sanctions? Because the likes of France and the likes of Italy have flirted with a new approach over the last couple of years as well. It's not just the United States coming in and floating new ideas. Is Europe on the same page here?
I think Europe is. There have been some soundings from people, some now out of office, like Prime Minister Renzi, who wanted to lift the sanctions. But Merkel has been the strong leader saying that that Europe, North America, have to speak with one voice as long as she's German Chancellor. I think those sanctions are going to stay, and it's the right move. Why would we give in to Putin and reward him for stealing other countries' territory in Eastern Europe? And they don't see that kind of strength from Donald Trump, but a lot of Europeans see it in Angela Merkel.
So, Nick, this is a fascinating discussion, but the fact that we've spent this much time on it is not achieving what President Trump said he was going to achieve when he got elected. He said he was going to really address the U.S. economy, jobs, questions of trade, things like that. You served in the White House on the National Security Council. What happens within the White House when a president wants to get back to a domestic agenda but is so caught up in the international?
Well, it's interesting, David. I think that the promise in the Trump administration is lowering the corporate tax rate and lowering middle-income tax rates and in regulatory reform. We've seen nothing from that. Instead, we've seen divisive statements. Frankly, his preposterous statement about Sweden and fights with Mexico and Australia. I think he should get back to the economic agenda. It would strengthen him. It would give his administration more credibility. And I think it would give us more strength overseas if we're getting our house in order economically here at home.